moving off 6-7 really good players in free agency. So the Niners gave Brock Purdy extra competition. They have signed Mac Jones to a 2-year deal. So this single move is why drafting quarterbacks in the NFL is so hard. So Brock Purdy played with Iowa State guys. Mac Jones played with great Bama guys. And it fooled every single NFL GM. Not a single one had Brock Purdy, who is absolutely a much better quarterback than Mac Jones. No NFL GM thought that. Mac Jones, 77% completion percentage in the SEC, 41 touchdowns, 13 games. But we discovered when Mac Jones doesn't get his way, when it's not an easy ride, when he has to play from behind, without a great offensive line, he folded. Not a lot of inner toughness. Bit of a temper, bit immature, not liked in the locker room. We found that Brock Purdy is a pretty darn good athlete, actually. Came in as the number 3 quarterback to San Francisco and fought like hell to become number 1. So they don't have a lot in common, but what do Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Brock Purdy have in common? They didn't come from traditional powers. They had to overcome. They had to create their own college offense. They didn't throw to 5-star receivers. They often took a beating. They often lacked a run game. And this is precisely why I like Shedeur Sanders in the NFL draft more than NFL GMs. No run game. Worst in Power 5 football last 2 years. No offensive line. But Shedeur Sanders had to initiate his own offense and was pretty productive. And so did Brock Purdy have a great arm? Because I hear Shedeur Sanders didn't have a great arm. Does Brock Purdy? I hear Shedeur Sanders, well, not that athletic. He's at least as athletic as Brock Purdy. They both process well. They're both accurate. This is what I say about Shedeur Sanders. Watch what he played with, not just who he played against. Not a lot of NFL O-linemen or running backs at Colorado. So his college experience for Shedeur Sanders, it looks just like a lot of the Iowa State stuff. In fact, I'd argue Iowa State had better players than Colorado in some instances. So this is why drafting quarterbacks is tough. Outside of anonymous trolls, everybody makes mistakes.
All right. This is definitely one of the crazier takes. Full disclosure, all these clips that I often make, I don't see them before, right? I always just do real time. But this was, one of the rare clips that I just kind of had playing in the background. I was making some food, and it was at the tail end of like another take, and I just like randomly heard that, and I'm like, is he comparing Shedeur Sanders to Brock Purdy? I'm like, what? Like, what is? I'm like literally making my food, and so it's a little loud, and I'm just like, wait, am I hearing this right? Like, is that what's happening right now? And my mind just kind of started to just, and I think he was being tongue in cheek with the Mac Jones, with some competition. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to gauge, but Colin has gone on and on about Brock Purdy not being good enough, that he's a good quarterback, but like you don't really want to pay him too much money, and that the 49ers, were unable to win a Super Bowl with him, that he can't carry a team, like all the negatives about Brock Purdy. And now you're using that quarterback as a reference point as to why Shedeur Sanders is actually better than people believe. I can't grasp the connection there. I'm all for using obscure comparisons and examples. It's honestly one of my favorite things to do, and it's something that people, a lot of people struggle with, right? When you say like, oh, Brock Purdy, famously, you say Brock Purdy, look at his numbers, and look at Patrick Mahomes. People like, famously freak out, right? They're like, Patrick Mahomes is so much better, and it's like, right, we understand that, but we're using this example to kind of prove a point, and it makes sense if you can just take a second and not start to lose your mind about comparing a Mahomes or a Tom Brady or anyone else, et cetera, that this a comparison doesn't mean equal, right? And just because someone has had more success in other aspects doesn't mean that you still can't compare a single season or whatever it is. You're just trying to paint a clear picture, or at the very least put a frame around a picture. But with this comparison, I'm struggling to grasp that, because also you got Brock Purdy like literally at the end of the draft. So you weren't really, and you got to pay him significantly less as well. Because if you get drafted in the first, whatever, like you actually get paid money, right? If you get drafted in the first round as a quarterback, like I forget, I don't know what the number is right now, but you get like 30, 40, 50 million. You get money. I think it's all pretty much in like a signing bonus, but you get money that Brock Purdy did not get, being drafted in no man's land. You're also using an actual first round pick that could be utilized for something else that the 49ers obviously did not have. Not to mention, if we want to say that Brock Purdy and Shedeur Sanders are going to end up being similar players, and again, he didn't really flesh out this comparison, so it's hard to really know where he was going with it. When we compare, if I make an example and I say, oh, look, Brock Purdy has similar numbers to Patrick Mahomes, etc., like the point that I was trying to maybe make in that moment, or Greg Jennings made a comparison like that, months ago when it was actually relevant, it was like, well, look, Brock Purdy's actually not playing as bad as you think, or look, people are praising Patrick Mahomes, but they're not praising Brock Purdy, yet they have similar numbers. Let's unpack why that is. Or they're not winning, but look at the defense. Like, it was a jumping off point to kind of have a deeper discussion. That's not what was necessarily done here. It was just like, hey, Brock, look what Brock Purdy did, and like, look at Shedeur Sanders. And it's like, but you're not saying that Brock Purdy's good enough, or that Brock Purdy can only win when you give him a stacked roster, etc., that he was a limiting factor in games. That so that can't be your selling point for Shedeur Sanders. Not to mention the maturity that Brock Purdy brings that Shedeur Sanders doesn't have. Like just the level of maturity and humility and lack of baggage that a Brock Purdy gets, that he has compared to a Shedeur Sanders. Whether right or wrong, whether some of it is just because of his name and his father, it doesn't matter. He has it. Not to mention also his own individual personality as well. I'm not saying that Shedeur Sanders is this terrible person or this. I'm not going that far or saying anything like that. But I'm just saying, like, he obviously has more baggage. He's already interviewed incredibly poorly at the combine, etc., etc. And I'm not really, in the mood to try to like debate those things. It's just, it's very obvious. And again, I'm not saying that Shedeur Sanders isn't going to be successful in the NFL, or that he can't, win, or that, again, that he's like this awful person. Like, I'm not saying any of those things. But when you just look at those two quarterbacks, if you're saying that both are potentially identical skill set or have, similar levels of success, you are going to take Brock Purdy every day of the week over Shedeur Sanders. It's just the reality, because of all the other baggage, because of the potential behavioral leadership issues, etc., etc. It's just a real thing. When someone when you even have people who are looking to draft quarterbacks, they're like, oh, he was kind of smug and kind of was indifferent and didn't really care. Yeah, that's part of it. It's a job interview. That is absolutely part of it. Like my dad used to say all the time, back when I was like trying out for teams and when I was younger, he was always like, you have to be on your best behavior in these tryouts. Do not give the coaches a reason to not take you. He's like, because if you are, the same as another player, they're going to take the player who they like, who they enjoy to be around more, who they think is a, just a better person, grounded, better behaved, whatever it may be. Someone who seems like they care more. If you're between those two players, like, that's what you're going to do. And it's the reality. Anyone who just even interacts with little kids knows this. And it continues forward into your adult life. If anyone who's ever really exposed to people who they don't really necessarily want to be around, you gravitate towards the kids who seem like better behaved, who are more interesting, who are kinder, who you just kind of, just get along with more. They're the ones who you want to coach, who you want to teach, who you want to play games with, who you want to interact with. The kid that's really annoying, who's like constantly complaining or causing issues, or, is just, kind of gross and is just doing weird stuff. You're like, okay, yeah, bud. No, yeah, it's good. Go over there and play, with the baseball. Cool. cool, bud. And you have to kind of fight it, because I try to be a really nice person. Anytime I'm interacting with, like, my niece and nephews, like friends and stuff like that, I'm always like, well, it's just a little kid, and I'll even in my mind, I'll be like, this kid doesn't feel like he's probably going to have a lot of friends growing up. So, like, I'm going to be, like, extra nice to him, or try to, like, really be like, come on, bud, like, let's try to do this now. Or like, no, don't do that. Like, you try your best to try to, push them in a positive direction. And I'm telling you, it continues from when you're 8, 10, 15, 25, like when you were on a team like this, that trend honestly really continues. It just does. And again, for anyone who's also continuing to age when they're 35, 45, like, you're always looking at the younger guys as, like, kind of like kids. If you're 45 and you see a 25-year-old, like, you don't see them as a man, you see them as a kid, because you got a chunk of years. You got essentially their entire life worth of years under your belt on top of what they have. So I got news to you, like, like Shanahan, like all these guys, like, they see these players as kids. And it's pretty much impossible to shake. And, do not undersell what Brock Purdy does from just even that aspect. We're obsessed with all these intangibles and leadership and all that type of stuff, and rightfully so. But yet no one ever wants to talk about that with Brock Purdy. That he's fundamentally a great person and an uncomplicated person. Things that many quarterbacks don't have. Okay? Like, we saw that with the Baker Mayfields of the world. Like, we've seen that even with Mac Jones. Mac Jones is reportedly unliked in the locker room, causing trouble. People, like, don't necessarily want to rally behind him. And that was a first-round pick. We've seen this endlessly with, like, Carson Wentz. I mean, I can keep going on and on and on and listening. And then you have other quarterbacks who people love to play with, who are not as good, but again, coaches, players, management, etc., they want to see them succeed. They want to give them a second or third chance. You have some players where a coach is just like, man, just give me a reason to keep you, please. Give me a reason to not cut you. And then you have other personalities where it's just like, please give me a reason to cut you. Please give me a reason to cut you. And Brock Purdy is just on that next level of you want him to succeed. You want him to succeed. Tua Tagovailoa is another example of that as well. And so, yeah, these guys get their chances. Trevor Lawrence is not like that. People don't love Trevor Lawrence. If you think Trevor Lawrence is going to keep getting, all of these chances, the only reason why they would is because they're just like, isn't there something here? They want to kick the tires. It's why Justin Fields reportedly kind of keeps getting chances, because people like him in the way he composed himself in Chicago, in Pittsburgh. He was a stand-up guy. And so those things matter. Those things matter. And I know we're kind of having multiple conversations at the same time, but, like, if you're going to talk about the comparisons of, like, Brock Purdy or Shedeur Sanders, well, then say that aspect as well. But also, if you're going to say, hey, Shedeur Sanders is pretty good, I think teams should draft him in the first round, well, then you got to pay Brock Purdy money too then. Then you have to say that he's a really good quarterback. And if you don't think that you can win with a Brock Purdy level quarterback unless you have a stacked roster, then I'm not so sure then you should draft Shedeur Sanders. Because then he's potentially not your forever quarterback. Because then you're just going to eventually run into the same position as Brock Purdy and the 49ers, where if your viewpoint is that that's just not good enough, well, then why walk down that path? So, I don't know. I'm struggling to make sense of it. Struggling to make sense of the comparison. Yeah, I don't know. But maybe you guys can make sense of it. Yeah, I don't know. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about Brock Purdy and the 49ers and the comparisons to Shedeur Sanders? Shedeur Sanders, hey, man, pretty good player. But Brock Purdy is just, he's not good enough. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment. So whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions. Let's get in some fights. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.